Lead Time is a podcast of the Unite Leadership Collective, hosted by Tim Allman and Jack Caliberg. Lead Time taps into biblical wisdom for practical solutions to today's burning issues. Each podcast confronts real-time struggles facing the local church in a post-Christian culture. Step into the action with the ULC at uniteleadership.org. This is Lead Time.
Welcome to Lead Time. Tim Allman here, and you may be one who's wondering what is going on with the Concordia University system. There's a lot that's been spoken about struggles at Concordia, Texas, and I am blessed today to get to talk with Christian Preus, Mr. Christian Preus, who is a churchman through and through, 35 years of attorney experience. You have served, brother, as on the LCMS Board of Directors from 2013 to present, as well as on the executive committee. You've chaired a number of different committees over the year, and namely now, Mr. Preus, you're chairing since 2019, I believe, and you can correct me, the 7-03 task force, doing a lot of work to bring our Concordias together under a common confession and really try to find ways for us to work together. And given a number of things that have occurred here, especially in the last year, that is not a simple task, Mr. Preus. And I certainly applaud you and appreciate your role for the wider church here in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. So my hope for the conversation today is that we would remain united in our various contexts if we need to. And this goes to, I believe, your uncle, Mr. Jack Preus, Reverend Dr. Jack Preus, who now rests with the Lord. I can't tell you, Mr. Preus, how many times I heard him say, if we must disagree, we must disagree agreeably. And so I pray if there are areas of disagreement, we can do so agreeably under our common confession in the Scriptures and the Lutheran Confession. So before we dig into 703 and all the work you and your committee have been doing, I'd love to just hear your ministry story and how you've stayed connected to the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod at the local and national level so well over the years. Welcome, Mr. Preus, to Lead Time.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me on to your show today. I really, really appreciate it.
An honor.
I think I was influenced probably most significantly by my father, who was former president of Concordia Theological Seminary, Fort Wayne, and Springfield, and a professor for 35 years. I can remember when I was younger in my formative years, I had 4 older brothers, all of whom had gone into the ministry. I think a lot of people thought that we were all pressured to become pastors, which was not at all true. That's just the direction that God led my older brothers. With me, my father would say, basically, you have 2 options. You can become a pastor, or you can become something else, and whatever else you do, you dedicate as much of your life as you can to serving the church. And he'd even say, if you want to go out and make as much money as conceivably possible, that's great, and then give as much as you can to the church.
Amen.
So that led me a lot. And growing up on seminary campuses, knowing faculty, knowing students, seeing their dedication, I think has always motivated me to do as much as I can to help the church, particularly the Synod and my local congregation.
Thank you. Thank you. And just to clarify, your father was a part of the move, right, from when Springfield kind of closed, and then Concordia Theological Seminary in Fort Wayne became one of our two seminaries during those years, correct? Yeah. So what years
correct.
would he served? I think he was a president when my dad graduated from Concordia Theological Seminary in 82 or 83, right in there. Would your dad have been president?
Yes, that's correct. He was called in 1974.
Okay.
And that was when he was at Springfield. Then the seminary moved to Fort Wayne in 1976, and he remained president till essentially 1992.
Did he talk about how hard that transition was at all ever with you, or was it pretty smooth? I don't know that story much.
It moving a school, an institution like that from one city to another is a huge logistical task. So there was a lot involved to that. And then at the time, the senior college was still located in Fort Wayne, so you had both the seminary and the senior college on the same campus. So there were a lot of logistical issues that arose at that time. But ultimately, things worked out quite well. The seminary is doing great.
Amen. Amen. Well, let's, for the sake of time, I could ask you so many points of question regarding the history of our church body, but we're gonna hone in now on the 7-03 committee work. Why were you put in charge? Do you believe? And I believe it was an appointed position by President Harrison, correct, to lead that task force, or just tell us the story, and then who else kind of made up that committee?
Actually, this was a little different. It helps to back up a little bit.
Sure.
2013 convention adopted a resolution addressing all of the items that are in 2019 convention resolution 703. So it happened in 2019 is not at all new. It happened, the same resolution essentially was adopted in 2013 and 2016. This is the third time around. One difference that was made was that instead of establishing task forces appointed by the president, it was delegated to the Synod's board of directors. Okay. Again, with active involvement of all of the other participants, the CUS presidents, CUS boards of regents, and others. So the same people were involved, but this time the task was assigned to the board of directors. So then it was the chairman of the board of directors that essentially appointed me to be chair of the 703 committee.
And then who else is on the committee? That's great. Yeah.
In addition to me, there are 2 additional board of directors members, 3 presidents, 2 board chairs, and 3 or 4 representatives from CUS, including the CUS president.
Excellent. So,
and the president of the Synod as well. And to the extent it's been helpful or necessary, we've also consulted with presidents about other Synod-wide institutions like CPS, LCEF.
Absolutely. I thought the work, because we have, and maybe you can speak to this as well, what is coming out right now in the LCMS workbook for the Synod Convention, that conversation and some of the edits, there are real-time edits taking place right now, which is a normal thing. So some questions I'm going to ask are based on maybe a 6-month-old document, but nonetheless, what I don't think will change is kind of the front-end story, the narrative, which I thought the committee did a wonderful job with in sharing how much our Concordias, given how our culture has changed, how much our Concordias have evolved over the years. One example is only 4% across all of the Concordias are church work students. And only 11%, this was very shocking for me. So I'm a Concordia Seward Bulldog grad, and I can just go back. I graduated in 2004. I don't believe this stat was the truth there. I remember the majority, what seemed to me like the majority of my friends played sports and the like were from LCMS congregations, but your research showed that only 11% of students are from LCMS congregations. So please talk how much the culture and kind of the landscape of our Concordias has changed over just really a generation.
Certainly. And that also influenced a lot of the work done by both the 703 committee up through November of this last year, as well as subsequent discussions. If you go back to the inception of most or all of the schools, they were created primarily, if not exclusively, for church work preparation, for pastors, teachers. That has changed over time. And there are a lot of factors to that. One very significant factor is that the money that the schools used to all be subsidized almost completely by the Synod for their annual operating budget. Almost completely. What happened through time is congregations chose to send less money to the districts. Districts chose, in turn, naturally to send less money to the Synod. And the Synod has less money to fund the schools. And over the course of several decades, that has progressed to the point where now the Synod's board of directors doesn't have funds sufficient to provide any of the subsidy. So that forces the schools all to take a very serious look at their financial situation and decide how to address it. All of them have done it in not identical but similar fashions, which is to establish other programs. That opens up other opportunities. It's not as though that's a totally negative thing, and it opens up other opportunities that they have capitalized on quite well. Mm-hmm. But it also means the money's coming from a different source. And it also means their recruiting is at least in part focused on different students. And that's what has led us to where we are today as far as the stats that you cite.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you help us understand how we ended at the two, because it seems like a long time ago. I was there, but how did this resolution kind of end in 2019 and the charge then to the committee right now? Can you just review that for us?
You have to go back to at least 2013, if not earlier. 2013 adopted, the convention in 2013 adopted a resolution that is almost identical to the one adopted in 2019. A task force was created. The task force accomplished some things, but certainly did not get the job done. So 2016 adopted some minor changes and then adopted another resolution identical to 2013. Went through another 3 years. Again, the job didn't get done. Progress made, some good things happened, but the job wasn't done. So the 2019 convention directed that this process continues. So it's been going on for 10 years to work on the governing documents and structure of CUS and its relationship to the universities and the Senate as a whole.
In the last 4 years, you've led this work. Were you connected to the other two triennium engagements on this work? Were you? Okay.
I was on the 2013 and 2016 task force, and a lot of the members currently also were, at least a couple of the presidents.
So then what led to greater work being done, say, the last 4 years than maybe the previous 6? Can you tell that story a little bit? Why was more progress made in your mind? Yeah.
I was on the first two, and I think there were some ideas that weren't necessarily bad ideas, but they didn't gain traction for a more comprehensive approach to governance. For example, the idea of having a much more controlled system with a chancellor at the top of all of the universities was an idea proposed. Other organizations have that, and it works well. It didn't gain traction. So time was spent on an idea that never gained traction.
Got it.
This time around, we spent a lot of time talking big picture. As a committee, I don't think we ever voted on anything. Instead, we talked things through to the point where everyone was either completely on board or at least was okay with what was being proposed. And we did that on every detail. It took a lot of time, a lot of discussion, a lot of input. But I think that helped get us where we are today.
Excellent. So before I get into clarifying questions based on what I've seen so far, I really want to stress gratitude for you and the committee. I know it is very hard and complex work, and so all of these questions come from a place of love and clarity. So a lot of what I've seen has been what some may title as kind of a law-based, or I've even heard words that a lot of this is reactive rather than proactive. And kind of, from my sense, it's indicative of what happens when certain agencies and people within agencies or congregations, institutions lack trust and maybe even respect for one another. So how do you believe that such kind of maybe regulations and being from a law background, boundaries, guidelines, whatever language you want to use, resolutions will help restore trust between the Concordias and the Synod leadership and the board of directors? And if the hope is that trust would be restored, what's your best case scenario for some of that trust being restored?
First, I think it's helpful to look at where we are today. We talked about 703 and the committee formed, it doing its work and it making a recommendation to the board of directors last October. Under the resolution 703, it's the responsibility of the board of directors to propose a new governance structure. So the committee worked essentially for the board of directors. Before the board of directors adopted what was then a revised final version from the 703 committee, the university presidents approached the president of the synod, myself as chairman of the 703 committee and representative of the board of directors, and CUS, and said in very general terms, they had some big ideas that they thought should be considered before anything was finalized. Board of directors said, okay, let's talk. The presidents then put together an alternative proposal that made two fundamental changes to what's in the convention workbook and what maybe you and others have seen.
And just to clarify, when you say presidents, are these Concordia University presidents or district presidents? Yes. Concordia, okay.
Concordia University presidents.
Very good.
They came as a group. They had been talking about the issues, and they came as a group and said they'd like to make some changes. They put together an alternative approach that was presented to the board of directors in February. Board of directors looked at it and said, let's continue to talk. It made two fundamental changes. Number one, the latest draft from the committee would establish an accreditation process. The presidents stated they preferred an ecclesiastical visitation process, along with some changes that go with that. Second, the proposal from the committee made a very significant change regarding the status of the universities, changing them from agencies, as defined in the bylaws, to affiliates, which is new defined. And we don't have time here, even if the show went all day, to talk about all the detailed differences, but those are very different statuses. The presidents stated that they wanted to retain agency status, along with what goes in that. So we had very extensive discussions on that, everything involved in the agency status versus the affiliate status.
So is agency, just to be, again, very, very general here, I understand it's a complex thing, but for the layman, me, is agency closer to synod and connection to, the board of directors, and affiliate is a little bit further away relationally? Was that the struggle, that affiliate would be kind of seen as less close relationally and confessionally? What can you speak to that just a little bit more?
I'll address it in two ways. I think you could generally answer yes. Agency is closer to the synod as far as kingdom of the left matters. The approach taken by the 703 committee and everyone every step of the way is to do as good a job as possible distinguishing between the two kingdoms.
Yeah.
And both approaches, 703 committee and the president's approach, maintains that. The agency status deals with both kingdom of the left, kingdom of the right. But under both approaches, kingdom of the left matters are simplified and streamlined so that it gives a little more leeway and flexibility to the boards of regents. Under agency, it's not as extreme as under affiliate, but even under the most recent proposal from the presidents that it actually has been adopted by the board of directors at its meeting last week. That also makes things more flexible for the boards of regents and the universities.
Yeah, excellent. It's been a complex, my goodness, I've been a pastor now for 15 years, and I think some of the wounds and the reactive concern to maybe the work of this committee, and we'll probably end up hearing it at the convention, is kind of unilaterally giving a very small group of people, you could say Synod Board of Directors or the Concordia University system, the power and authority to divest, to sell off, just like we've done in Bronxville and Selma and up in Portland. And I know all of those stories are unique. All of them are the struggles with those institutions were from unique places. So how is this team saying, no, even the current conversation around Concordia, Texas, and their desire to stay connected, but kind of disconnected, just give us greater clarity on how this team is kind of saying, okay, that happened for sure, but we're just working right now in the present, and just dismiss some of those fears that people may have that a small group of people could unilaterally sell one or all of our Concordias. Can you just talk to that, Mr. Preus? Thank you.
Sure. First, with respect to the 3 schools that closed, Selma, Portland, and Concordia, New York, the decision to close in each case was made exclusively by the Board of Regents. No one else came in and said you have to close.
Each institution.
Of each institution, yes.
That's
good. No one else came in and said you have to close. The Board of Regents solely made those decisions.
Thank you.
Second, as far as any type of consolidation or divestiture, the affiliate model essentially eliminates that issue altogether, because the school would be an affiliate and could essentially on its own decide to disaffiliate with the synod and go its own direction. Under the proposal that has been worked on with the presidents and board of directors in CUS recently, there's no change to that. The bylaw that's in effect that deals with that issue has been in effect for a long time. I don't even know how long. It was changed a little bit in 2019. That, as I recall, really wasn't a controversial issue. The specific bylaw, I think I have it here, 3664I. No one has suggested any changes or modification to that. It's been brought up specifically with all groups. No one has a concern.
Okay. So I would rather, because there's a lot, I'm interviewing President Christian here soon, and I think there's more that we need to say on multiple sides of Concordia, Texas. So I'm just going to kind of table that for now, because I think there's plenty to talk about just as we head into the convention. So another new group is this IAC, the Institution Advisory Council. Can you say a little bit more about the Institution Advisory Council? This is a new council, Mr. Preus?
I'm under the proposal from the committee. It creates a commission on university education.
Okay.
If that's what you're referring to.
Yeah.
And
so I've seen this CUE group and CUS. There's just so many acronyms that sometimes it gets confusing.
Right.
So just, differentiate CUS, CUE, and then this Institution Advisory Council. As it stands present.
Well, we currently have CUS, Concordia University System. Yes. Under the 703 proposal, CUS is eliminated, and CUE, a Commission on University Education, is created. In both proposals currently out there, the roles of whether it's CUS or CUE is essentially the same. It's almost primarily Kingdom of the Right responsibilities.
Okay.
There's also an advisory council for the universities that consists of the presidents of all of the universities. And that's not something new. Its responsibilities are adjusted a little bit with respect to the new proposals because of the reduced role of the CUS. So it probably has a little more influence. And then it will relate to the ecclesiastical visitation process a little differently than the current relationship with CUS. It's a much more proactive approach to working together among all the institutions. One thing it's done that I think everyone has advocated for, and the presidents have been a great voice in this, and that is to have more talk and discussion. And having the visitation process allows for that. Instead of someone remotely making decisions that go top down, it involves actually visiting, talking, seeing firsthand how things are working, and making suggestions or working together to try to improve the relationship between the universities and the Synod.
That would be wonderful. I think right now, a lot of the conversation has just been information, disinformation. So I said I'm not going to break my word, but I do just want to share a little bit of the story that I heard about the visitation, because this is the most recent example when Synod and leadership, which were you a part of that, Mr. Preus, when you went to Concordia, Texas? I'm unsure for that visitation. No, you were not. Okay.
No, I wasn't on that team, no.
So the biggest struggle is the amount of time and then trust that kind of deteriorated. As I'm reading this story, and I've read even President Christian's kind of response, I speak for myself. I don't speak for Don. I just speak for myself. There were some things that I think we needed to have a conversation about. And unfortunately, 9 months, this is from President Christian, 9 months went between the actual visit and when they actually received the report. So getting back to your work, what is the rhythm of connection for once an ecclesiastical visit takes place, a report is formed? I saw there needs to be about 60 days or so for a response to the report, but is there an expectation that comes from synod leaders, whoever makes the ecclesiastical visit, that, hey, within 30, 60 days or so, we'll have a report of what we found that will establish kind of a baseline or standards? And I'd love to hear you talk about this. I read standards a lot, or standards by which we're evaluating kingdom of the right principles. Any response to that? I know I just shared a lot, but
Sure. Well, first let me talk about the standards.
Sure.
A draft set of standards has been created. That was created by CUS Board of Directors, formed a committee that has prepared a draft of that. It obviously can't be adopted yet because we don't have the new bylaws, but we all wanted the process to not get bogged down if it's adopted. And so CUS proactively went ahead and created those standards. There's been participation of the university presidents in those standards. Currently, and maybe there's little details out there, but I'm not aware of any concern about the standards that's been raised. And the draft has been circulated among all the different parties involved.
Can you just give us an example? Like, is it scripture and confessions? I mean, I'm assuming it's the small and large cat, small car. It's a lot of the standards that we go by. Can you get a little bit more specific, though, what the standards look like?
Yes. Well, it's been a while since I've reviewed those, but certainly they're intended. The standards are intended to provide guidelines to the universities for how to manage and administer the entire university as a confessional Lutheran institution.
Okay.
So it will set goals. For example, hot items are: what are the percentage of faculty that are Lutheran? Mm-hmm. What are the percentage of students that are Lutheran? I don't remember what those percentages are, and they're obviously subject to further discussion.
Absolutely.
As well as a number of items as far as standards that would be goals set for the universities to establish. And they're not hard and fast rules. Thou shalt do this and thou shalt do that, or else.
Right.
It's a global approach to administering the entire university in a fashion that improves its Lutheran ethos and improves its relationship to the Synod.
It's wonderful. More boundaries, maybe policies that set boundaries by which, or would you not use that language?
I probably wouldn't use the word boundaries. I know some people like to use words like that. There's a deliberate attempt in it to be proactive and formative in the approach, not to be some type of hierarchical organization. And again, the presidents have been, I think, outstanding in helping form the approach and thinking on that.
Wonderful.
Throughout the process.
I'm sure there will be a lot of conversation around those respective standards and how they'll be applied. So look forward to that conversation. I like the idea, and I think this is 3.10.66 or so. Yeah, there's a lot, but I like the idea of shared resources within the Concordia's collaboration. I think that's a great thing. Nonetheless, I'd be curious to know, because you've spent a lot of time now, a decade or so, trying to get your head wrapped around the current and the future trajectory of the Concordia University system. And do you see a need to grow our institutions to meet the changing needs in our various United States contexts, or and I'm asking you for you to just give your gut in the next decade or so. Do you see an opportunity for more Concordias under a shared confession? Or unfortunately, would you see, wow, we're going to have to look at divestiture and closing and consolidation more so? What do you see as the trajectory of the Concordias?
I think you have two questions there. Let me address the coordination aspect first, because I think that could have an impact on your second question regarding what's going to happen in the future. Interestingly, the coordination issue was one we considered at the very beginning of our process on the 703 committee. We did a survey of all of the regents, all of the members of all of the boards of regents of all of the universities. And we asked them what they considered to be the most important issues facing their work. And by far, the number one response was coordination among the universities. How do we improve that? Makes sense. The better they can coordinate, the better they can share resources, the more of that they can do reasonably, the better off they all are.
Yeah.
When we went into our discussion on that topic, basically two approaches to take. Do you have CUS do the coordination, which you have in the current bylaws in part, or do the schools do coordination? Ultimately, we came down on the side that it's best to have the schools do the coordination. We sensed that that's what the Board of Regents thought, and we agreed and think they were right. CUS has simply not been able to do that over the past 3 decades. And if they haven't been able to do it for 3 decades, a different approach is necessary. So that was basically handed over to the boards of regents for them to figure out, and university administrations, the president's administrations, boards of regents, how can they best coordinate with each other going forward? Then to your second question, what do I see as the future? I think, unfortunately for us, by far the biggest factors are completely outside our control. Number one is demographics. It's a shrinking population going into the future that will be attending universities, including higher education of the Synod. So we have a shrinking pool of potential students. That's a huge factor. Number two, the financial struggles of universities is only getting more difficult. Not because of their fault necessarily, but we have a more complex, sometimes antagonistic society, and they have to deal with those big issues outside our church body. And I think it's the demographics and the external factors that they have to face that are probably the biggest. I do think, and this is actually something we haven't talked a lot about, but when you look at higher education, there is a lot of middle administration costs that could probably be eliminated. We as a committee and the board of directors don't dive into those types of issues facing the universities. That's their responsibility, but that's probably one thing they can do internally to reduce their costs and make each institution more financially viable. I think what 703 did and what the most recent draft that's prepared tries to do is recognize those realities and make our synod as a whole, make CUS, and make all of the universities more nimble in the process to address the challenging factors outside the synod and make it easier to coordinate and work with each other going forward.
This has been wonderful.
I hope we've accomplished that. It's honestly, this is one of these things you put all the best minds together, you work hard, you rehash it and rehash it. but you really don't know 100% how well it's going to work until you get into it.
Well, it's a complex thing, right? I mean, you've got multiple boards, and then you've got, just to clarify, CUE, Concordia University. What's CUE stand for again in the proposal?
Commission on University Education.
Commission on University Education.
It would be and here's the kind of fundamental difference between CUS and CUE. CUS is a separate corporate entity. CUE would be a commission. And that reflects its very narrow assignment, which is almost exclusively kingdom of the right responsibility.
Ecclesiastical supervision.
Right.
Yep. With respective leaders, presidents making up, at least having a hand in that, and that the CUE would be elected leaders at Synod and Convention. Is that the proposal?
Yes, essentially the same as CUS elections. There's some differences in qualifications based on the more narrow focus.
And primary, and this is what I'm hoping for in this modification right now. Primary focus is ecclesiastical supervision, and I couldn't stress enough for encouragement and for oversight. It can be, as you just talked, leading in a number of these environments can be a discouraging, maybe overwhelming thing. And so I pray that CUE would lead with encouragement, love, charity, best construction, and then, just like any pastor has, I am accountable to a board of directors or a council of elders, et cetera, that there is that oversight, but that the tone, the tenor would not be this kind of coming in and we're heavy-handed, but that it really would start with relationship of love and trust and respect for our unique calls to bring Christ to the world in our various contexts. And we are still blessed as a synod with wonderful Concordias in so many diverse spaces within the United States of America. And I pray that there, with these standards, that there's also the recognition of the unique opportunities and the strengths that each one of our Concordias kind of present. And then you could look at like a platform theory. We haven't talked about that, but then, hey, this would be a wonderful place to go. While Concordia University Irvine is starting a really robust nursing program. We need wonderful nurses, et cetera. That there's just greater collaboration and sharing rather than competition between our Concordias for an ever-shrinking pool of students. Anything else to add there about, I'm speaking more to the culture, the spirit of CUE as we move forward. Any closing comments there, Mr. Preus?
Yes, let me address your last comments that are all positive, good comments. I think that's been the environment that we've had throughout the process with the 703 committee. I think our collegiality and our working together just to continuously improve. I think the discussions the last 6 months with the presidents and CUS has taken a huge step forward on that. I think the trust factor has only improved constantly. Let me give you one example, and feel free to talk to any of the members of the Council of Presidents. At the February meeting, Brian Friedrich, the president of Concordia St. Paul, and I made presentations to the Council of Presidents. I presented what the 703 committee had proposed up to that time. Brian explained what the university presidents at that time were proposing. Some very different fundamental approaches to this. I thought it was very productive. I think the Council of Presidents thought it was very productive. Very different proposals. It has a lot of different impact. But we've been able to sit down. I've been working with Brian for 10 years and might disagree with him on some issues, but he's always a total churchman, totally professional in everything he's done. I can say the same for the other presidents who have been on the committee. Russell Dawn's been outstanding. We had Pat Ferry up until the time he retired, and then Bernard Bolt joined us, who came in running full steam. I mean, he came in immediately understanding and contributing. So, and the other presidents as well who have had great input. So I think the trust factor, we've made huge progress with that, and our positive discussions lately, I think, reflect that. Including, and when you think about it, the board of directors adopted a late overture this last week that went with the proposal worked on with the presidents. It did not adopt what the 703 committee put together. There are two kind of competing approaches. Board of directors went with the presidents. CUS, as I understand, is also supportive of that. That shows an awful lot of unity that's been developed through a lot of conversations. So
can you? That is beautiful.
Yeah,
right.
and even what has been put together in the past 6 months, it incorporates an awful lot of what the committee did, but not everything. It makes a few fundamental changes. So Excellent. There's a lot more to be done. It's going to go to a floor committee in a few weeks, and the floor committee will do its thing, and then it'll go to the convention. I have no doubt there'll be a lot more discussion and a lot more consideration of the big issues. Excellent.
Well, this has been clarifying, and I really, really appreciate your wonderful work. And I pray that as we move into Synod and Convention, the world is kind of a final comment here. The world is such a crazy place right now, Mr. Preus. I mean, yes. The secularism and just the confusing nature on whether it's diversity, equity, inclusion, and how that kind of conversation spills into the sexuality conversation. We must, as the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, remain united, obviously under the cross of Jesus Christ, confessing him as King and Lord, and then recognizing the assault on Christian virtue and the home in general, and remaining united on these main topics today. I couldn't, and I'm 42 here in a month here, Mr. Preus, and the older I get, the more I guess confessionally conservative, grateful for our Lutheran heritage, our framework as Lutheran theologians I become. Some of the, and if people have listened to me for a while, I got the kind of zealot part of me. I'm a Peter type of a personality from time to time, a little bit of a bull in the china shop, but I hope that bull is just simmering down. Why? So that we can think clearly, be churchly with one another, keep our eyes fixed upon Jesus, and as J.O. Preus said, if we have to disagree, do so agreeably, working toward unity. This has been wonderful, Mr. Preus. Yeah. I appreciate it. Final thought from you based on that?
I completely agree with everything you've said, and I would add that I sometimes think the developments in society are actually helping bring us closer together. I think we become more aware of what it's like outside and realize we need to be united inside. So I think that might, in an indirect, odd way, be helping us out.
Amen. Praise be to God. This is Lead Time. Sharing is caring. Please like, subscribe, comment wherever it is that you take in conversations like this, and we promise to continue to have, especially in this season, wonderful, hopefully challenging and enlightening conversations about how we here in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod can go forward in a common confession and a common mission. Jesus loves you. It's a good day. Go and make it a great day. We'll see you next week on Lead Time. Thanks so much, Mr. Preus.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Lead Time, a podcast of the Unite Leadership Collective. The ULC consults and brings together cohorts of congregations to build the culture, systems, and structures of intentional discipleship multiplication. To go deeper with us, create a free login on uniteleadership.org for access to exclusive materials and resources. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for next week's episode.